Hey everyone. So, for no reason whatsoever, I recently ended up watching a lot of Jane Austen adaptations this year, and I really enjoyed that experience. Right before I did that, I just so happened to have watched Saltburn, and as I was watching all those Jane Austen movies, I realized a lot of what Emerald Fennell did in Saltburn is kind of lifted or maybe just indirectly inspired by Jane Austen. So when I went to research Saltburn, I didn't find a lot of people talking about it. So I just wanted to make a quick video essay about it. Um, this was supposed to come out months ago, but I am very bad at project management. So here we are, mid-June, talking about Saltburn. Saltburn has been compared to a lot of movies: Parasite, Theorem, Cruel Intentions, and of course, The Talented Mr. Ripley. With all these movies, there's sort of the elements of class disparity, of sort of someone from the lower middle classes mingling with the rich and getting caught up in the lifestyle, and also just sort of the general unease that comes with mingling with them and the carelessness of their attitudes.
If you'd like to watch like an analysis of Saltburn compared to The Talented Mr. Ripley, I highly recommend the Tumblification of Cinema by a YouTuber whose name I forgot. I'll put the link in the description. There's another video that I used while making this, which was Teresa Johnson's I Did Not Like Saltburn. I found both of these videos pretty interesting, and I thought they did a really good job critiquing the movie. This video right now, it's not really going to be a critique so much as just comparing it to some of my favorite Jane Austen works. I think the story of Saltburn borrows heavily from Mansfield Park and Northanger Abbey, although I am going to be talking about the other stories in sort of sparing matters and talking about motifs in all of them. In particular, I'm going to be comparing the movie Saltburn to the movie of Mansfield Park 1999 and the movie version of Northanger Abbey 2007. I know these aren't like perfect adaptations of Jane Austen's works, but I think these ones have a lot of credit, and I think it's pretty clear to me that Emerald Fennell maybe watched at least Mansfield Park at an early age. So before I get into the comparisons, I want to just quickly summarize Saltburn, Mansfield Park, and Northanger Abbey. So Saltburn is about Barry Keoghan's character, Oliver, who attends Oxford University, finds himself competing with the rich and elite students both socially and in his classes. Through circumstances, Oliver befriends Felix Canton, played by Jacob Elordi, who is a rich heiress of the Saltburn property. Oliver's dad dies. Felix takes pity on him and invites him to spend the break at Saltburn. There's a montage of Oliver and Felix establishing their friendship, and Oliver quickly worms his way into the family, impressing everyone, and also sleeping with a couple of them. However, this all goes awry when Felix realizes Oliver's dad is not dead, Oliver is not poor, and Oliver has pretty much been lying about everything. Felix, instead of doing the rational thing of sending Oliver home or doing anything, Felix decides to let Oliver just kind of stay for a party, and then Oliver kills him. Oliver then kills Venetia, his sister, sends Farleigh away, and waits 16 years to kill Rosamund Pike. At the end of the movie, Oliver has successfully inherited Saltburn by eliminating the other heirs. Mansfield Park is about Fanny Price, the eldest daughter of an impoverished family who was then sent to live with her rich cousins in Bel Air. Sorry, I meant Mansfield Park. Such a stupid joke. Three of her cousins, Mariah, Julia, and Tom Jr., are mean to her, and Edmund, her cousin, is very nice to her, and she falls in love with him. After a montage of her growing up, Sir Thomas leaves the family to go oversee his fortune in Antigua because he is a plantation owner. More on that later. Mariah becomes engaged to a Mr. Rushworth, and we meet the Crawfords, Mary and Henry, two siblings who are social climbers, we'll say for now, who really want to keep themselves rich, and Henry just kind of wants to sleep around. Edmund pursues Mary, but then she realizes that he's going to be a clergyman, and he's not going to have a lot of income. So my girl, being who she is, needs to secure that bag and tries to convince him to leave that stupid profession for like law or politics, something good, you know? Henry eventually falls in love with Fanny Price and tries to convince her that he's changed his womanizing ways. She doesn't believe him because why would you? Fanny is sent home to live in poverty. Eventually she's invited back when Tom Jr. is sick, and the family sort of reunites. That is until Henry and Mariah begin having an affair. In the 1999 version, this happens in the house. In the book, this happens off screen in London, and you hear about this from another character. Mary Crawford's true colors are exposed to Edmund, who realizes that she is a bad person, and then at the end of the movie, at the end of the story, Edmund just kind of falls in love with Fanny Price. Northanger Abbey is about Catherine Morland, who the narrator describes as not a typical heroine, which means she's a tomboy. Catherine Morland is taken by her neighbors to Bath, where she meets Henry Tilney. Later in the story, she meets John Thorpe, which brings us to our second side of the love triangle. However, Catherine doesn't care about John Thorpe, like, at all, and it's actually very funny to watch. So he's really more of just an obstacle between Catherine and Henry. Eventually, Henry's father, General Tilney, invites her to stay with them at Northanger Abbey. In the book, this happens at like chapter 20, and in the movie, this happens maybe 50 minutes in when you finally get to Northanger Abbey. Catherine, for some reason, is convinced that the Abbey holds dark secrets. This is because Henry Tilney jokes with her and says that it is, but he's lying to her. But then it turns out he's not, but we'll get to that in a second.
Are you prepared to encounter all of its horrors?
Horrors? Is Northanger haunted then?
Well, that's just the least of it. Dungeons and sliding panels, skeletons, strange, unearthly cries in the night that pierce your very soul.
And vampires? Don't say vampires.
Catherine begins to investigate Northanger Abbey, and pretty soon General Tilney kicks her out of the house ungraciously. And Catherine is convinced it's because she's accused General Tilney of killing his wife. But it actually turns out General Tilney is a gold digger and he wants his kids to marry rich. And when he found out Catherine Morland is upper middle class, she was kicked out. Henry Tilney stands up to his father for once and pursues her anyway, arrives at her home, and proposes to her. In the book, General Tilney eventually comes to accept Catherine's and Henry's love for each other, but in the movie, they don't. Henry is now estranged from his family. So all three of these narratives are named after the predominant English estate that they take place on: Northanger Abbey, Mansfield Park, and Saltburn. Mansfield Park is believed to have been named after Lord Mansfield, a prominent abolitionist of the English Supreme Court. And so, as previously glossed over, Sir Thomas is a plantation owner, right, with enslaved people. He and the rest of the family directly benefit from slavery. And so Mansfield Park is a new money, sort of modern at the time, English estate. This is in comparison to sort of Mr. Rushworth, who is old money, who ends up marrying Maria. Even though it's presumed to have been named after an abolitionist, the story is a lot less clear on Jane Austen's stance on slavery. So for one thing, there's really only one scene where Fanny Price challenges the idea of slavery in the English Empire. That's not great, and it kind of just ends in an awkward silence at dinner. And what I like about the 1999 version, which maybe some more diehard Jane Austen fans might disagree with, is that it makes the entire story about slavery and how Sir Thomas owns a plantation. I think that's a really weird thing. I think if you made a movie about Mansfield Park, you just have to address it. It's a really weird thing. And so the wealth of its inhabitants are kind of constantly brought up. Fanny Price is from a poor family, but she's a cousin of this new money family, right? Her brother William is promoted in the Navy due to connections from the Crawfords. And this is all showing the growing of the middle class that's happening at this time in Regency England. And again, it's about the family drama of Mansfield Park, right? It's about the drama of when these two eye-catching strangers, the Crawfords, kind of cross into the threshold of the Bertram family. So in Northanger Abbey, the majority of the plot actually takes place in Bath. Again, we don't get to Northanger Abbey until chapter 20 in the book. And in the 2007 90-minute movie, that roughly translates to about 50 minutes. Austen wrote notes that the book should be called Catherine. However, her brother ended up naming it Northanger Abbey. I actually understand why the brother maybe went with that name. So Northanger Abbey is kind of making fun of Gothic novels. Catherine Morland is obsessed with reading them. She's reading real books that you can actually, I think, still read today. None of them are lost, and none of them were actually made up. A lot of these are actually named after sort of the prominent estate where they happen. And so I can understand why her brother maybe went with Northanger Abbey. These novels could be described as sort of pulpy and sort of mass-produced. And they kind of gave novels a bad name, kind of like Colleen Hoover novels. So obviously the romance in Northanger Abbey takes a more central stage than the romance in Mansfield Park, right? But it's more about Catherine Morland coming of age, and so she comes of age by exploring the Abbey, you know, kind of indulging her imagination, and then she realizes, well, things aren't as simple as she believed them to be. So I think it's appropriate that it's named Northanger Abbey, even though she probably wanted it to go with Catherine. And Saltburn is the estate of the Cantons. This is an estate that has been passed down through generations. By the time of 2006, it is old money. We obviously don't know exactly when the Cantons began to possess Saltburn or when it was even built. I imagine also we've only seen like a fraction of the actual house maybe that it was filmed in. So at the beginning of the movie, Oliver says that he wasn't in love with Felix. Obviously the whole movie is about whether or not he loves him or not. But Oliver loves the property of Saltburn probably more than he loves Felix. I mean, not probably, he kills for it, right? He kills 3 people in this movie to get this property, right? Oliver's most intimate scenes are with the actual physical property of the manor, right? The bath scene, Oliver is licking the drain, right? He is putting his tongue into Saltburn. The grave scene, Felix is buried on the Saltburn estate, and Oliver is penetrating it? Oliver is transfixed by Mansfield Park. He's in love with it. And he's so in love with it, he's willing to kill the other person he's in love with it with. In a way, maybe it's like a twisted love story between Oliver, Felix, and a house. And of course, while Oliver is at Mansfield Park, he's constantly reminded of the social order, right? That's by Farleigh or Sir James. All of these people sort of assert their eliteness over him. Of course, by the end of the movie, Oliver is seen dancing around Saltburn because he has reversed the hierarchy. He is now in charge of it.
A common setup in Jane Austen's works is the class disparity between the heroine and the hero. In Sense and Sensibility, Eleanor and Marianne have been recently impoverished by being cut out of their will. Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet is rich, but she's not Pemberley rich like Mr. Darcy. In Persuasion, Anne Elliot's family is in debt, while Frederick Wentworth has made his fortune in the Navy. In Mansfield Park, Fanny Price is the impoverished cousin of the Bertrams. She pretty much lives at their behest. She is at the will of her crazy aunt, Miss Norse.
But you girls must never be arrogant towards her. She is not your equal, but that must never be apparent to her.
She is not seen as equal by her cousins, except for Edmund, who again is her cousin, and she does fall in love with him. That is really weird. So even though Catherine Morland is middle class, she's not Northanger Abbey rich, and General Tilney is obsessed with keeping his family rich throughout the ages, so he doesn't approve of Henry Tilney and Catherine Morland after he finds out Catherine Morland is not rich. She is not the heiress of a merchant family, the Allens, who just happen to be her neighbors. And just like Fanny Price and Catherine Morland, Oliver is also at a class disparity between himself and the Canton family. So Oliver originally tells Felix that his parents are drug addicts, he has a very unsafe home, and he pretty much lives in poverty. He's on scholarship to Oxford. All of this stuff to get sympathy from Felix, right? And Felix believes it. Felix takes him under his wing. Felix apparently just likes showing poorer kids that he is rich and he can take care of them. However, halfway through the movie, we find out Oliver lied. Oliver is actually upper middle class, which is still a class disparity between him and the inherited estates of Saltburn, but it's an interesting change, right? Oliver, in order to appeal to a rich family, has to sort of play the part of someone who's poor. He has to pretend to be poorer than he actually is. He has to pretend to be. Oliver to gain the sympathies and trust of them. He ironically has to say that he's not rich, that he's not from a wealthy upper class middle family. He is poor. He comes from a drug addicted family, and he has an unstable home. This is something, he's playing on the tropes that are sort of established in their minds. So, besides this class disparity, Oliver doesn't really have anything else in common with Fanny Price, Catherine Morland, or any of the other heroines. He's a stalker. He is a bad person. He is obsessive, extremely emotional. He's not dignified. He doesn't have any qualities that would appeal to Felix, and so he has to lie about them. So is there anyone that Oliver is like? So Oliver isn't like any of the protagonists of any of Jane Austen's works, but he is kind of like the Crawfords. So Mary and Henry Crawford arrive at Mansfield Park about halfway through the story, and in a lot of ways, Mary Crawford is a social climber. As a woman in Regency England, her position is not secure. Yes, Mary Crawford will receive some money from her family when she marries. However, that can't be her primary means of income. She wants to marry rich. She wants to enable her own lavish lifestyle. She has a very clear vision for her future, and it's when she's rich, she's schmoozing with other people. She is an elite. So when she meets Edmund Bertram, there's a conflict, right? Because she actually does like Edmund Bertram. There's a lot of very early on where she kind of understands him. She likes that he's sincere, that he's nice. All of these girls just like him because he's nice. They gotta raise their standards a little bit. But love isn't enough for Mary to marry Edmund, right? Mary wants more than just to be the wife of a clergyman.
The clergyman is so drear. The clergyman's wife is even worse.
What profession would you suggest, Miss Crawford? I'm not, as you know, the firstborn.
Oh, there must be an uncle or grandfather to place you somewhere.
There is not.
Well, choose law then. It's not too late. At least you can distinguish yourself there with language and wit.
I really have no wish to blunder about on the borders of empty repartee.
Or your father could put you into Parliament.
My father's choices are less than compelling for me. No, I wish to become a clergyman. I think there are worse things than a life of compassion and contemplation.
So two family tragedies kind of happen to the Bertrams halfway through. Tom Jr., the eldest son, set to inherit Mansfield Park, becomes almost deathly ill, right? I think he has pneumonia, but I don't think it's said what disease he actually has. The other one, Maria Bertram, leaves her husband, Mr. Rushfield, while having an affair with Henry Crawford. When Mary learns about this, she actually doesn't care, and she actually blames Fanny Price for rejecting Henry Crawford. Mary then gives this really impassioned plea about how when she and Edmund inherit Mansfield Park, they can welcome Maria and Henry back into civil society, and then everyone else can. And then the family can recover, and because they're rich, people will want to be seen with them.
After a respectable period, Edmund and I will accept Maria and Henry into our acquaintance and household. And then the rest of you, after an appropriate period of distance, will decide to properly support them as well. And the Bertrams, being people of respectability, as they are, she may recover her footing in society to a certain degree.
Fanny Price is then like, hey, how are you going to inherit Mansfield Park? You're going to be a clergyman if you marry Edmund.
Such a developed strategy. And how will a poor clergyman afford these good dinners and large parties?
Chance is not always unkind.
I beg your pardon?
If Tom is not able to recover, Edmund will be the heir. And wealth and consequence could fall into hands no more deserving.
Tom Jr. might die, and so I can inherit this, and that can make Mansfield Park mine. Everyone is horrified by this, and Edmund finally realizes that he is in love with a psychopath. He calls her out on this bullshit, and she leaves disgraced.
You attack Fanny for following her own infallible internal guide about matters of the heart. All this has most grievously convinced me that the person I've been too apt to dwell on for many months past has been a creature of my own imagination.
In a lot of ways, Mary isn't really the villain of the story. She's just kind of looking out for herself. She understands her position in society, and she wants to make sure that she can enable her lavish lifestyle. That she wants to make sure she still has her lavish lifestyle. Her biggest flaw is that she enables her brother's behavior. Henry Crawfield is pure manipulation. He is a womanizer with very little reason to do so. I think it's actually hinted at that he has kind of like a tragic like backstory, but it doesn't matter. In the movies, it doesn't matter. After meeting the Bertrams, he and Mary Crawfield actually have this very funny sibling debrief on the lawn of Mansfield Park, which is in both versions of Mansfield Park, but whatever.
I like them both exceedingly. But I like Julia best.
Why?
Because her Aunt Norris advised me that it must be so.
She certainly seems very ready to be fallen in love with.
Though Maria is most agreeable.
Though her choice is made.
Yes. And I like her the better for it. An engaged woman is always more agreeable than a disengaged. She is satisfied with herself. Her cares are over, and she feels she may exert all her powers of pleasing without suspicion.
Throughout the whole movie, he's flirting with her, constantly trying to seduce her, and sort of just toying with her, even though she's engaged to Mr. Rushworth. And of course, on Mariah's part, she is enabling this behavior. You know, it takes two to tangle, is what I'm saying. So he just relentlessly flirts with Mariah throughout the whole story. Everyone notices. He also, I think, flirts with Julia a lot, and Julia is extremely uncomfortable. Julia doesn't do a whole lot in the story. So when Mariah finally marries Mr. Rushworth, she and Julia go on their honeymoon, which is really funny that she brought her sister because she really does not like Mr. Rushworth, her new husband. In the book, Henry Crawfield decides that he wants to make Fanny Price fall in love with him. And then ironically, Henry Crawfield falls in love with Fanny Price due to her sincerity and how just awesome she is. It's kind of like how your brain can't tell the difference between liking something ironically and liking something like for real. And so when you start to make jokes about ironically having like a foot fetish, you end up having just a foot fetish. So Henry is relentless pursuing Fanny Price.
Dance like an angel, Fanny Price.
It's not dance like an angel alone, Mr. Crawford.
What? A compliment? Let the heavens rejoice. She complimented me.
Complimented your dancing, Mr. Crawford. Keep your wig on.
Fanny, you have created sensations which my heart has never known before.
Please.
There is only one happiness in life, to love and be loved.
Mr. Crawford, do not speak nonsense.
Nonsense?
You're such a fine speaker that I'm afraid you may actually end in convincing yourself.
Fanny! You are killing me.
No man dies of love but on the stage, Mr. Crawford.
In the 1999 version, there's this really steamy scene where he like takes the book that Fanny Price is reading, reads it to her like really close, and just invades her personal space. I'm sure someone on Book Talk would really appreciate that. My favorite scene though in the 1999 version is when Fanny Price is at home and he sends her a fireworks display. Apparently, I don't know how historically accurate that would have been, but that is hilarious that he did that.
All right then, stay back.
And so Fanny Price has this conflict of, can she really trust Henry Crawford to change? But Fanny Price persists in being herself and continues to reject Henry Crawford. Eventually, Henry Crawford just goes back to his womanizing ways and has an affair with Maria. So Oliver is a weird combination of both Mary and Henry Crawford. Oliver is a social climber, just like Mary Crawford. Oliver is concerned with his position in society, although he's already set. He is completely secure. Oliver just wants more. So he kind of goes through a similar arc that Mary Crawford and Henry Crawford go through. Because Henry Crawford does kind of like Fanny Price, but then his old habits went out. Mary Crawford also really does like Edmund Bertram, but her habits of social climbing, her need to live a lavish lifestyle sort of wins out over her attraction. And so Oliver is obsessed with Felix. Maybe he doesn't love him like he says in the movie. Even if we take Oliver at face value where he says he doesn't love Felix, he's obsessed with Felix.
I wasn't in love with him. I know everyone thought I was, but I wasn't. I loved him, of course. It was impossible not to love Felix, and that was part of the problem.
However, that obsession doesn't win out over his obsession with Saltburn. At the end of the movie, when he's telling Rosamund Pike's character that he doesn't love Felix, you can't believe that because he drank the man's bathwater. There was no reason to do that if he planned it himself. That's why kind of like that stupid montage where it shows that everything was a setup is kind of annoying, because it's a much better movie if you don't have that like 7 minutes where he's explaining his plot. It's a better movie if Oliver is obsessed with Felix throughout this whole movie, and yet he doesn't really physically touch him very often. He is seduced by Venetia and then eats her out and then sort of has to juggle between the relationship between Felix and Venetia, right? Oliver is suffering from being too big of a flirt and being too obvious. Farleigh catches him with Venetia, tells Felix. Felix is mad about it, rightfully so, too, because it's, first off, you're a guest and you're banging his sister. It's also outside, but whatever. Oliver then later would jack off Farleigh after Farleigh is being difficult. Oliver actually uses this to, I think, get his passwords to log into something, and then frame him for stealing some artwork from Sir James. Right, and this is kind of like Henry Crawford in a way, where he's just sort of a womanizer. Obviously, in this case, Oliver is a bisexual legend, banging Farleigh and Venetia. There's a really weird parallel where Venetia stands outside Oliver's window and then Oliver kind of goes down to meet her. But in the 1999 version of Mansfield Park, I shit you not, there is also a window scene where Henry is standing outside her window and Fanny Price puts out a candle with her hand.
Hey.
Fucking hell, you gave me a fright.
Sorry, I just thought you were sleepwalking.
Wounds.
If Oliver is the Crawfords, is there a Fanny Price in the story? So Farleigh Start, which is his real character name, you can look it up on Wikipedia, and Fanny Price share a very similar position in the Canton estate. Both of them are impoverished cousins that were brought in kind of just through the generosity of the sort of patriarch. Farleigh's sister, I believe, is Elspeth's sister, and so he's brought in just by the good nature of Elspeth and Sir James. He is unlike Fanny Price in a lot of ways, though. Farleigh is spoiled. He is constantly belittling people for his position. So Farleigh benefits from the benevolence of the Cantons. He is allowed to stay with his cousins. He's allowed to be their equal. He's allowed to socialize as their peer. And because of that, he ends up bullying Oliver for not being their peer, for not being rich, even though all of his money is provided for him. His education is provided for him. He also benefits from the nepotism, where the teacher recognizes his last name as his mother's last name and just bonds with him, even though I don't know why the teacher would say that stuff, but whatever. This is in like stark contrast to how Fanny Price is treated. Fanny Price is told explicitly she is not to be equal with Julia and Mariah. She is pretty much a servant to Aunt Norris. It's just these like little death by like 1,000 cuts from like everyone. In fact, the only person who again the only person who doesn't treat her as less is Edmund Bertram, who she falls in love with. It's also mentioned by Venetia that Farleigh has been caught stealing multiple times and has often been kicked out of the Canton household. Right, and so that goes to just show that Farleigh is not learning from his mistakes. He's still just a spoiled brat. And the Cantons are just kind of naively trusting him. Maybe not naively. I mean, honestly, it's kind of good that they're these good, generous people to their family. But you know, at a certain point, you gotta just set up a boundary. But they only really take care of Farleigh because of their blood relationship to him. And I think he's kind of an inverse of Fanny Price, right? Fanny Price at the beginning of the novel is overtalked. She is timid. Nobody really listens to her. She is often ignored. And then at the end of the movie, she gradually asserts herself more and more, and she stays true to herself.
Welcome. Fanny, thank you for coming.
Fanny, I've been meaning to ask you, how long are you staying?
I'm not certain, Aunt Norris. And how long are you staying?
Farleigh Price is kind of like the boy who cried wolf too many times, right? He's complained too much, he's gotten caught too much, and at the end, when he's right about Oliver, the family dismisses him. The family does not listen to him. They don't trust him. For some reason, they trust Oliver more.
No one else finds that weird.
I wouldn't throw stones if I was you, Farleigh.
Excuse me?
Please stop.
What is he saying? I have no idea.
What I'm saying is I would feel guilty too.
Guilty?
If I was the one racking up lines the night someone died.
Fuck you.
That's not a denial.
Is that true? Search Farleigh's wrong.
Yes. No. Get out! Oh, wait.
What's happening?
Elspeth?
Don't you dare look at her!
Get out!
I won't mention this to the police. That's all you'll get, and nothing more.
And he's kicked out, and we don't see him again. Honestly, I wish we did. Like, he's actually kind of an interesting character, and it's weird how he doesn't really get like a finish like the other characters. Farleigh is the only like black character who has like a speaking role in this movie. And so Farleigh is actually half African American because his mom kind of just left the family and went to America and had Farleigh. There's kind of like a weird moments where Farleigh kind of calls out the family for not paying attention to race and not paying attention to like their black footsmen. That doesn't really go anywhere, but I think it's worth mentioning. I think it's like an interesting idea that Emerald Fennell started with, but she never finished anything with it. It doesn't really come to fruition or anything like that. Farleigh and sort of Oliver's positions are central to understanding, I think, Saltburn. If Mansfield Park is about proving how goodness does not correlate to wealth, Saltburn is about the opposite. Saltburn is about a guy who was born in less than elite circumstances, and he is a monster. Farleigh was born into poverty and is rescued by the generosity of cousins, and he is also a dick. Felix is born into wealth, and his biggest flaw is that he's too trusting of people. So while at Oxford, there's this weird character that isn't mentioned again after we go to Saltburn. The character's name is actually Michael Garvey. I'm pretty sure nobody actually calls him by his name in the story.
I'm Michael Gavey. Oliver,
Oliver.
This character, Michael, is set up to be kind of stalkerish like Oliver. He is kind of constantly watching Oliver. He's sort of obsessed with him.
I'm sure anyone can go.
Oh no, it's invitation only apparently. You get an invite in your pigeonhole.
I haven't checked.
I have. You didn't.
And also kind of warns Oliver about the Cantons. This makes it seem like the Cantons are evil. They're not. And so it doesn't really make sense why he's doing any of that. I think this character is a red herring for the audience. I think it sets up this sort of queer love triangle between Oliver, this kind of stalker guy, and Felix. But then it kind of doesn't go anywhere. I think it's actually kind of similar to the love triangle in Northanger Abbey. And honestly, this section is a stretch even for me. So as previously mentioned, Northanger Abbey primarily takes place in the city of Bath. And John Thorpe is present through all the sections where she's at the city of Bath. And he is constantly trying to not seduce Catherine Morland, but to sort of woo her, court her, before Henry Tilney does. Because John Thorpe is convinced Catherine Morland is rich. John Thorpe is a social climber. He's kind of obsessed with wealth. And he's trying to impress Catherine Morland. So one of the things he does is like he takes her on an open carriage ride. He tries to drive really fast and impress her, and she is actually just scared the whole time. And then the Allens call her a slut for riding an open carriage, which sucks, but whatever. And it's actually very clear that Catherine is just uncomfortable around John Thorpe. But he just ignores that, and he continues to obtusely intrude in her life, even when she makes no attempt to reciprocate any of his feelings. I think maybe what Emerald Fennell was trying to do with this character was sort of like a twisted love triangle where Oliver is obsessed with Felix and this other character is obsessed with Oliver, and Oliver doesn't care about this character, sidelines him almost instantly, and the character just kind of disappears. This is a stretch, to be honest. I think this character serves a lot less narrative purpose than John Thorpe does. John Thorpe is a character that Catherine trusts too early in the story. Catherine realizes that she's given John Thorpe like the wrong idea, and he actually even mentions the idea of like proposing to her, and she's like, oh shit.
James to Fullerton and then on to town to help him choose a ring. Perhaps I might look for one for myself while I'm there. Do you think I should? A famous good thing, this marrying scheme. What do you think of it?
I think it's a very good thing too.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that. Do you ever hear the old song, going to one wedding brings on another? Perhaps you and I might try the truth of that. I shall think of you when I'm in town.
So in Regency England, you had to be introduced to someone before you can really start to talk to them. And you had to be introduced by like a common acquaintance. So in Pride and Prejudice, Lizzie Bennet is introduced to Mr. Darcy by her father, who had already made a common acquaintance with them. So in Northanger Abbey, Mrs. Allen and Catherine are at a ball, and they don't know anyone, and they can't talk to anyone because they don't have any common acquaintances to introduce them to new people. Eventually, Mrs. Allen bumps into Henry Tilney by mistake, and he actually tears her Shah, or I think it's a Muslim.
Have a care, sir.
1,000 apologies, Mum.
Catherine, do take this pin out of my sleeve. It was not your fault, sir.
Allow me.
Oh. Thank you kindly, sir. Though I'm afraid it's torn a hole already.
There. Nothing too disastrous, Mum.
Henry then talks to them for a little bit and then has to get the Master of Ceremonies to properly introduce them before they can start to have some kind of relationship with each other and before Henry Tilney can ask Catherine Morland to dance.
Really, I shouldn't have allowed you to speak to him as a stranger. But he had such an understanding, a Muslim.
I wonder where he's gone.
Oh, here he comes again. And he's brought Mr. King with him, the Master of Ceremonies himself.
Mrs. Allen, Miss Morland, allow me to present to you Mr. Henry Tilney, just lately arrived in Bath.
Mrs. Allen, Miss Morland, delighted to make your acquaintance.
Oliver also has to have kind of a complicated reason to meet Felix. So for a lot of the movie, so for the beginning of the movie, Oliver kind of hopelessly yearns and pines for Felix. And by pines and yearns, I mean he stalks him outside his window. And yeah. But, you know, luckily Oliver does get an opportunity to meet Felix. When Felix's bike has a hole in it, Oliver, being the savior who he is, offers his own bike to Felix.
Oh, you want me to take yours back?
No. I'm sorry. I just thought.
I mean, I can wheel it back to college. It's not that far.
Thank you. I'm sorry I don't know your name. I'm Felix.
Oliver.
Oliver.
Yeah.
Oliver. Oliver, I love you. I love.
Yeah.
I love you. I love you. I love you. Seriously.
Okay.
Thank you so much, mate. So kind. You're a fucking lifesaver, really. Thank you. All right. I'll just leave yours in the bike shed. Yeah.
Later, Oliver then meets them at a bar, where Felix then comes to Oliver's rescue again, providing him some money to pay for the tab of drinks. At the end of the movie, it's revealed that Oliver planned all of this. Oliver poked a hole in Felix's bike. Oliver had money and just hid it from Felix to make Felix buy drinks for him. Oliver has been the reason for everything.
Please, I don't have any money. Could I just pay you tomorrow?
What actually happened? He sent an email to Sotheby's to say that he'd come by some Palissy plate.
I've actually just bought a little flat nearby.
Oliver had a complicated way to get into Saltburn. I want to just bring this up because Northanger Abbey and Saltburn have a very similar beginning, where it takes a while to get to the titular property. In Northanger Abbey, the novel, you spend half the novel in Bath, right? Because it's just the courting relationship between Catherine Morland and Henry Tilney, right? She doesn't have a reason to go to Northanger Abbey until she can be invited there by the general. And in Saltburn, it's kind of the same reason. Oliver doesn't have a reason to go to Saltburn until he's invited. Unlike in Northanger Abbey, Oliver makes the reason. Oliver manipulates everyone to get him to where he wants to be. And then Oliver annihilates a family. In Regency England, the options for courting couples to actually physically touch each other were pretty slim. Often the only appropriate way for them to do that was through dance. This is why there's so many scenes in the works of Jane Austen where characters are dancing together and actually having a conversation. It's the one time they can really speak freely with each other. And, you know, these touches are often fleeting, but they're important. Take the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darcy helps Elizabeth into the carriage. This is a pretty simple, chivalrous act, right? Well, the camera zooms in on his hand because this is one of the only times he's ever really touched her. He helps her in there and he realizes that he's kind of falling in love with her. The camera then zooms up to his hand and we know that he's feeling all this tension there physically and emotionally. It's kind of electric. So how does this compare to Saltburn? Well, I can't show you. Saltburn is pretty aggressive sexually. We are much more sexually liberated as a culture than we were 100 or 200 years ago. So as a result, much more emphasis can be put on sex in a casual or a very recent relationship. Oliver is actually intimate with two people in this movie, Venetia and Farleigh. There's definitely some irony going on where Oliver, the one person Oliver kind of wants to have intimacy with, he can't. He has it with Venetia and then he sort of forcefully has it with Farleigh. In the case of Venetia, she actually kind of seduces him. She stands out his window and sort of beckons to him in a very kind of creepy Lady of the Lake kind of kind of thing. Oliver then goes outside and he engages in what some people are calling the vampire scene, but he eats her out while on her period. Farleigh and Oliver kind of have gotten into a fight earlier in the movie, and Oliver sneaks into Farleigh's room to forcefully jack him off and then asking him if he's going to play along with him. Oliver uses this also to gain access to Farleigh's phone or computer, where he sells some priceless bowls from Sir James. This is a setup for Farleigh to get kicked out by the Cantons, and thus sort of removing another obstacle between Oliver and Saltburn. There's a lot of irony going on where Oliver is not intimate with the person that he has the most obsession with. The closest he can get to being intimate with Felix is licking his ejaculate out of a drain. I'm not trying to say this is like a deliberate inversion of Jane Austen, right? Because we live in a different time, and so we are much more sexually liberated, and so a lot of movies have sex scenes or implied sex or scenes where just the two characters are laying in bed and because it's a PG-13 movie, the girl has to have the covers up to her neck. I think the emphasis on these physical touches between Oliver and these main characters, it likens back to Pride and Prejudice 2005 or Persuasion 1995. These are scenes where kind of like the movie slows down. You're kind of invited to be a voyeur to Oliver and these characters. Kind of like how Oliver was a voyeur to Felix being intimate earlier in the movie. Emerald Fennell, I think, stated in an interview where she came up with the bathtub scene first, and then she thought to herself, how does someone get into that situation? And I think part of the problem with this movie is the bathtub scene. Oliver wants to be obsessed with Felix, but he's really being more intimate with the drain, which is a part of Saltburn, and so Oliver's really more interested in the physical property of the manor. But also the scenes kind of serve as, I think in a way, shock value to get people to want to watch Saltburn. I think the deliberate horniness of the movie is really interesting to view it in a way similar to physical touch in Jane Austen. I don't think that's the true purpose of them, but if you consume a ton of Jane Austen material right before watching Saltburn, it is very weird. Ever seen The Bachelor and The Bachelorette? You know, by like the end of the season, when there's around 4 or 3 contestants, they do these things called homecomings. That's where the Bachelor or Bachelorette is invited to then spend a couple days with the families of the contestants. The contestant then shows them around. They're supposed to act surprised around all their old childhood memories. The family gets interviewed about the Bachelor or Bachelorette. It's pretty weird. It's pretty funny, honestly. In all the movies I've been comparing, they all have a very distinct and important homecoming scene. So in Mansfield Park, after Fanny Price has refused Henry Crawford, and after a montage of being verbally abused by her uncle and her aunt, Fanny is then sent away to live in Portsmouth with her real family. And this happens in the book too, where Fanny is then sent to live in poverty. And in the book, she kind of makes note about how different everything is to Mansfield Park. She does that too. She does that in the 1999 version too, and she also kind of has like a breakdown of realizing how kind of bad it is living there. Suddenly, Henry Crawford kind of comes back and starts love bombing her. In the book, he sort of tries to court her one last time. She rejects him, and then he goes back to London. In the 1999 version, Henry Crawford appears and love bombs the shit out of her, and then she breaks down. She eventually relents and says yes to his marriage proposal, only to reject him the very next morning.
You spend your days in comfort. With me.
I know.
You do?
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Is that the yes I have heard 1,000 times in my heart, but not from you? Fanny Price. You will learn to love me. Say it again, please. Say it.
Yes.
It actually is kind of like a sweet marriage proposal. It's too bad that he's a liar.
I spoke hastily. I've anguished over the matter, and I feel that I cannot marry you.
I'm not prepared.
Fanny is eventually visited by Edmund, who tells her that Thomas is sick and she is needed back at Mansfield Park. And that is how she leaves Portsmouth.
Edmund.
I've come to take you back to Mansfield. You're needed there.
What's happened?
Tom was celebrating in Newmarket and fell ill. And the group of young men he was traveling with left him behind to recover with Yates, who then deserted him as well. He was found alone, almost dead, 2 days ago. The situation is very grave. We must hurry. If you wish to, that is.
In Northanger Abbey, Catherine is kicked out of the Abbey by the general when he realizes that she is not rich. Catherine at the time believes it's because she was investigating whether or not the general killed his wife. All of these are very funny movies.
My father insists on your leaving immediately. As soon as you can make yourself ready. The carriage will take you to meet the public stagecoach. No servant will accompany you.
Ungraciously sent home. She doesn't have any servants to escort her, so she has to kind of find her own way, using carriages to take her all the way across England. When she gets home, she's very embarrassed because her parents are talking about her with the Allens, talking about how she maybe disrespected the Tilney family and how and how Bath was a disaster for her to be there. Henry Tilney does arrive. He meets her family. All of her younger siblings are enthralled by this mysterious man, and he tells her what's going on.
But I thought... No. It's I who should apologize. There's nothing you have said or thought that could justify the way you have been treated.
But you were angry with me, and rightly so.
I was angry with you, but that is long past. Your imagination may be overactive, but your instinct was true. Our mother did suffer grievously, and at the hands of our father. Do you remember I spoke of a kind of vampirism?
Yes.
Perhaps it was stupid to express it so, but we did watch him drain the life out of her with his coldness and his cruelty. He married her for her money, you see. She thought it was for love.
And Henry tells her that he wants to marry her. And so this homecoming scene, in comparison to Mansfield Park, is better, right? Like, this is a happy ending for Catherine. She's with her family, and she gets to start her own with Henry. Oliver's homecoming is a disaster.
What have you done? What have you done? Your mum called a week ago. You left your phone in the bathroom, so I sort of just picked up. I mean, you've been ignoring her calls for weeks, and I just thought that maybe I could help. And on the phone, she sounded sober, mate. She had no idea where you were, and she just wanted to send you a card for your birthday.
Please turn the car around. You can't take me there. You can't, Felix. You can't take me there.
She's your mum.
Unlike in Mansfield Park and Northanger Abbey, where the protagonist was sent home, Oliver is unwillingly kidnapped to visit his family. So at the beginning of the movie, Oliver has told Felix that he's in poverty, that his dad died, and that his mom is a drug addict. And Felix, for Oliver's birthday, decides is going to reunite Oliver with his mom, which is kind of a dangerous thing to do for somebody's birthday if you believe their parents are a drug addict. But we're not going to get into that. Felix drives Oliver to a secret location and then tells Oliver that Felix is driving Oliver and tells him that he has a surprise for him. Oliver recognizes the signs and starts begging Felix to not take him there. Felix then takes him to a very nice suburban house, and Felix is like, oh yeah, she just got like a good house. She's doing pretty well for herself. He is greeted at the door by Oliver's dad, and this is a disaster.
Oliver! Crumbs, you're alive. I didn't recognise you. Happy birthday, love. You must be Felix. It's so nice to meet you. Your father's in the garden.
His father?
Yeah. He's been pacing round all morning. He's so excited. Come in. Come in.
Oh, that was in Mykonos. We go every year. Well, not anymore. You know, not now that kids are all grown up.
Kids? You told me you were an only child, Oliver.
No,
I've always talked about my sisters.
I think this scene is a pretty interesting reversal of the homecoming scenes in Mansfield Park and Northanger Abbey. In those movies, in Mansfield Park and Northanger Abbey, the men think they're rescuing the heroines, right? Henry Crawford believes he's going to rescue Fanny Price from poverty. Fanny rejects him, but then Edmund ends up kind of rescuing her. Catherine Morland is kind of despondent after being forcibly evicted from the Tilneys' house, and she believes she's never going to see Henry again. Henry rides across England in a white stallion, and he doesn't rescue her, but he and her get to start a new life together. And so Felix kind of thinks he's going to rescue Oliver. He thinks he can patch up Oliver's family problems, right? So Felix thinks he can rescue Oliver. Felix thinks he can fix all the family problems in Oliver's life. So Felix tricks him into visiting his mom, and Oliver starts to realize what's happening and starts to beg him to not go. Felix expects to find Oliver's mom at her lowest moment. Instead, he finds two parents that actually love and support Oliver. And it's quite the shock, and I will say Felix does handle it pretty well. And, you know, this homecoming scene is tense and awkward and cringy, because this isn't the romantic scene of somebody rescuing someone out of poverty. This is Felix finding out his friend is upper middle class. And so Saltburn is, I guess, kind of a queer movie, right? Because Oliver is maybe gay, bisexual. Felix is never really stated, but everyone is very sexually open, I guess, in this movie. And there's no real precedent for that in Jane Austen's works, right? There's no character that is definitely queer-coded. There are a lot of theories about characters. I think I saw one where Emma could be construed as asexual. There's subtext to suggest that maybe Jane Austen was queer, lesbian, or asexual again. She didn't marry. She had a close relationship with her half-sister. I even saw a queer reading about the flipped gender roles of Catherine Morland and Henry Tilney. I'll link that in the description. But this is all kind of subtext and interpretation. There's obviously no explicitly queer characters in Jane Austen's works because it was Regency England, right? You couldn't really put that into a novel. Jane Austen was also using a pen name at the time, and so, you know, we get the idea of how constrained it is as a society, right? You're not going to be able to write a Saltburn in 1810. Austen didn't write a gay character because she couldn't. She was limited by the times. But that being said, there is actually a long history of people queering or interpreting her works as queer. The first American production of Pride and Prejudice featured an all-women's cast from Wesley College. And in 1932, a fictionalized play about Jane Austen's life called Dear Jane premiered on Broadway. In the play, the character Jane Austen rejects men that inspired Pride and Prejudice, the men of Pride and Prejudice. So she rejects a Mr. Collins, she rejects a Mr. Wickham, she rejects a Mr. Darcy, in favor to run away with her half-sister Cassandra. What's actually really cool about this is that the woman who played Jane Austen and the woman who played Cassandra were actually a real-life couple. And their relationship made huge headlines when it was discovered. Patricia Rozema is the director of the 1999 version of Mansfield Park, and she was even at the time, she was an out lesbian in a committed relationship, which I think she's still married to that same woman today. But Patricia Rozema also made the choice to kind of queer code Mary Crawford a little bit. In an interview, she stated, "It's definitely in the book, and that was part of my attraction to Mansfield Park, because I knew I could indulge myself in a couple of scenes," said Rozema. "The lesbian frisson is character development for Mary. She's very worldly, and she's been around the block. Who knows where she's been and where she's going? It's not completely clear." As well as giving Mary's character's credence, these scenes tell a more dramatic story about Rozema's pride and industry's prejudice. "I had to fight for those scenes. I had to make a big speech at one point," she says passionately. "People have seen my films before, and if they come to this movie and I've taken those scenes out and I couldn't, or really tampered with them in a major way, I'd look like a fraud, and I'm not acknowledging where I've been and where I've come from. It's really important for me to keep them in, not just as an acknowledgement to my audience, but to me. Otherwise, the whole enterprise could feel like a sellout, like standing outside for myself for a bit of commercial gain or fame. The source for this quote comes from an article called Mansfield Park. That's not important, but I really like that name. But I think there's this long tradition of queering the works of Jane Austen that Emerald Fennell is kind of maybe subtly trying to tap into. Maybe she's not even aware of it. To me, Saltburn is such a clear setup of a Jane Austen work, and the deliberate twist of adding homosexuality to it, adding queerness to it, is a very deliberate choice on Emerald Fennell's part. It's probably important to point out that Emerald Fennell is not a gay woman. She is a straight woman in a straight heterosexual marriage. And so there's been some criticism of her portrayal of gay people, sort of falling into the trope of gay men being stalkerish, obsessive, or sort of predatory towards straight men. This is sort of a trend that was pretty common in the early 1900s. And it kind of served to demonize gay people in the wider kind of consciousness of of audiences. This is something that kind of comes up in Thomas Ripley too. However, I think a lot of people kind of pan that critically and think it's a little more tastefully done. Emerald Fennell sort of defended the queerness of the movie, saying, This is a film entirely about desire, and that desire takes every conceivable manifestation, and it's so important. And yeah, of course, queerness is part of the very fabric of the film. In defense of the queerness of the movie, the Gay Times published, "Whatever you make of Oliver's sexually ambiguous but abominable behavior, his journey definitely has a queer-coded edge. He is totally fixated on someone unattainable. He reinvents himself in order to be accepted, while tolerated in a world where he doesn't belong. He does the Pet Shop Boys at karaoke." Okay, that last one only happens because of Farleigh. But in a way, it highlights the main reason Saltburn is being embraced by so many. LGBTQIA+ viewers. It's unafraid to look camp right in the eye and then do something unhinged. Really, no film with a cheeky girl song on its soundtrack should also have a scene where the main character humps a grave, but Saltburn does and somehow pulls it off. So a lot of the criticism about Saltburn comes from its confusing message about class consciousness, class commentary, or just sort of the eat the rich vibe. Emerald Fennell has a similar background to the Cantons. Her family doesn't own an estate per se, but she is the beneficiary of generational wealth. And because of that, she's been called kind of too sympathetic to the Cantons to really criticize the class as a whole. I think it's important to bring up the author's kind of background when you're discussing films, novels, books, anything like that. Any sort of story criticizing wealth. The Cantons are actually really nice, rich people. And Oliver is just is almost insane for being mean to them. Like, I think in the movie, Oliver even mentions that he thought they were wasting their wealth. They actually don't do anything that bad. Like, yes, they have lavish parties, but that's kind of all they do. There's one article I found pointed out that the Cantons don't even have like a cohesive ideology. They're not xenophobic or bigoted like you would expect a family of that background to be. They're actually quite nice to people. They're very nice to Oliver and try to understand him, maybe on a surface level, and maybe they're very superficial, but they don't deserve to be annihilated because of that. I think the article even mentioned that they were too apolitical to be realistic. Felix's biggest flaw is that he's too trusting, he's too naive, and I guess you could point out that that's because he comes from a sheltered upbringing. But Oliver has no reason to lie to him at the first place. I guess in Felix's mind, Oliver has no reason to lie to him. I think Oliver lying about his wealth is a pretty interesting idea for a movie to explore, especially if you consider influencers that kind of do the same thing, where they downplay their wealth to be more relatable. This is definitely related to that blocking out all their celebrities in 2024, where people are blocking them out after the Met Gala. And so Oliver kind of tries to appeal to Felix's better nature of wanting to help people. So Oliver has to lie and say that he's worse off than he actually is. This is in contrast to maybe like The Talented Mr. Ripley or in Parasite, where the characters have to lie about their credentials to make themselves seem like they're part of the elite, where they have to seem like they're into it. Oliver lies kind of downward, downplaying his wealth and actually saying that his life is harder than it is. And Felix then is like, Felix grapples onto that and thinks that he can fix him. I think this also kind of shows that like Oliver is sort of born evil in comparison to Ripley or the kid from Parasite, whose name I forgot, where they're sort of corrupted by the wealth. They're corrupted by the allure of the lavish lifestyle that their people they're jealous of live. Oliver is too much of a stalker and creepy to ever be sympathetic to the audience, right? At the very beginning, you understand that he does not, at the very least, does not respect boundaries. At the very least, will steal from the Cantons, right? And it's only at the very end where Oliver literally eats the rich by eliminating everyone. He kills 3 out of the 5 Cantons. Sir James is, I think, implied to have died of COVID, and Farleigh is actually never seen again, which is kind of another critique that people have of the movie. Oliver can be his most intimate after he's eliminated the Cantons. At the end of the movie, he joyfully leaps around the house naked, dancing to Murder on the Dance Floor, completely exposed to himself after he's ridded of all the servants and all of the Cantons. Oliver can finally be himself when he's by himself. Emerald Fennell stated in an interview, "It's a satire of the rich, but it's also a satire of those of us that want in." And so I don't think Saltburn is a typical Eat the Rich movie. Saltburn is about the people that want to eat the rich and then become the rich. Saltburn is a very limited class critique of the upper middle class that want to have more and kind of want to leave the rest of us behind. It's not really a criticism of the material conditions that having wealth creates. It's not asking us to think about the ethical dilemmas of owning Saltburn. It's asking us to think about the ethical dilemmas of taking it from the rich already. And I think that's why people think it's way too sympathetic to the Cantons. On paper, the Cantons are, I guess, the perfect rich people in a way. They seemingly are not using their wealth to influence politics or make anyone's lives purposely worse. And I guess in a way, Oliver is like the worst person who can have Saltburn. Oliver will do all those things. Oliver sees it as a waste. Oliver sees the Cantons wasting their wealth because they're not using it to influence things for their gain. So Saltburn is this very limited critique of social climbers who don't hate the rich because of the nature of being rich. They hate the rich because they're not rich. All available evidence, Oliver lives a great life, and yet it's still not satisfying. The film kind of maybe suggests that Oliver is just kind of born that way, that he's born with this innate desire to just kind of destroy. He's born with this innate jealousy of the rich. Oliver's parents state while talking to Felix that he's always been kind of antisocial. Oliver doesn't have friends. The only person who even tries to reach out to Oliver, Oliver rejects. Oliver wants to be rich. That is all Oliver wants to do. Oliver is just evil in this movie. The movie, in a way, says that, like, you know, people are not just inherently good if you're in a lower class. And I think I do agree with that message. It's just not a very powerful message. So how does this relate to Mansfield Park? Well, Mansfield Park is a family drama, but I think it has a lot to say about class at the time of Jane Austen writing it. So Fanny's mom and her 2 sisters actually married into 3 distinct classes, right? The oldest sister married married Sir Thomas Bertram, and they became the owners of Mansfield Park, right? They lived the most lavish lifestyle. Aunt Norris married Mr. Norris, who was a parson for Mansfield Park, and they lived sort of an upper middle class lifestyle. Mrs. Price married for love, and that was a bad decision in her case because she is impoverished. She lives in Portsmouth with her husband, and they have way too many kids. and it is not going well for them. And so Fanny Price is shipped off to live with her rich cousins in Bel Air. I'm sorry, I mean Mansfield Park. I made that joke twice. There's also comparisons of new money and old money. So the Crawfords and Rushworths are both older money than the Bertrams. And in fact, Mariah's marriage to Mr. Rushworth is kind of an attempt to climb the social class even further by mingling the Bertrams with an older inherited estate of the Rushworths. And that's kind of why Sir Thomas is constantly pushing Fanny to marry Henry Crawford. He sees it as an advantageous marriage for Fanny, and he's kind of being realistic about it. However, Fanny realizes that there's more to life than just having a rich husband. There's also having a rich husband that you love. And I think the novel also kind of touches on who deserves wealth and who actually possesses it, right? The most moral characters, Fanny and her brother or her sister in the 1999 version, are poor, right? They are the moral paragons of the story, but they live in impoverished conditions. And in the case of Fanny's brother, he actually pulls himself out of poverty by his own merits. And so the Crawfords are kind of the opposite. They are a sibling duo that is rich, and they want to stay rich. Mary Crawford is doing anything she can to desperately stay rich. Mary Crawford is, at the end of the day, a realist, and she wants to secure her position in society, secure the lavish lifestyle that she is accustomed to. And so, yes, she does love Edmund, but she can't marry Edmund because she wants to be rich, and Edmund is okay with not being rich. And so the Bertrams are kind of caught up on this moral scale between the Prices and the Crawfords. Sir Thomas himself is a plantation owner, which is a pretty despicable thing to be. Thomas is sort of squandering his inheritance. Mariah and Julia are both spoiled and kind of don't appreciate anything. But Edmund is, in spite of a similar upbringing, is kind. Edmund understands his position in society and still just wants to be a clergyman. This is actually pretty rare for Jane Austen characters. Jane Austen kind of has a history of writing off the clergy or making fun of them. This is pretty noticeable in Emma. But Edmund actually just generally wants to go to join the clergy because he's actually called to do it. For Edmund, is not a paragon. Edmund falters. Edmund falls for Mary Crawford, does kind of listen to her, and is almost willing to change, but then realizes that he doesn't love Mary Crawford and he doesn't want to change, and he kind of realizes that Fanny doesn't want him to change either, and that's kind of why he falls in love with Fanny Price. And so I think Mansfield Park is kind of getting at the idea of you're not born good just because you're wealthy. You shouldn't be a moral leader because of your standing in society. And I think Emerald Fennell is trying to prove the opposite of that. Emerald Fennell is saying you can't just criticize the rich if you're born in the lower class. You might have ulterior motives. You might want the same thing. Just because you lack wealth doesn't mean you're inherently good. Jane Austen was honestly doing the same thing 200 years ago in Mansfield Park, and she was doing it better by actually critiquing the rich. I think, to me, when I watched Saltburn the first time, I was slightly whelmed with it, right? I didn't hate it, but I didn't really love it. But watching Jane Austen, watching a ton of Jane Austen movies and then watching Saltburn again really made me appreciate kind of what she was trying to do. Or maybe it's because I kind of went insane watching it. Maybe you can decide as well. Either way, I think I like the movie a lot better now, thinking about it interpreting it as Emerald Fennell's attempt to twist and play with Jane Austen's works.